The spotlight was blinding as I stood on stage, my heart pounding so hard I was sure the entire ballroom could hear it. Just 24 hours earlier, my boss had cut my salary by 25% and threatened to fire me if I didn't smile and play nice at this company gala. Now, the CEO was handing me a microphone, announcing my promotion to Director of Client Strategy in front of 300 people, including the same boss who had tried to destroy my career. But this wasn't just about revenge. This was about discovering that sometimes your worst moment becomes a door to your greatest opportunity. Let me tell you how I went from fearing for my job to taking control of my destiny, all because I refused to stay silent when it mattered most. My name is Marta Monroe, and I've been working at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions in downtown Chicago for 3 years. The October wind whipped through the glass corridors of our third to second floor office, carrying with it the scent of rain and the weight of uncertainty that had been hanging over our company for months. I stared at my computer screen, watching the quarterly reports paint a picture I'd grown all too familiar with: declining client retention, missed revenue targets, and a company hemorrhaging money faster than we could bring it in. The numbers didn't lie, but they also didn't tell the whole story of the sleepless nights I'd spent crafting proposals, the weekends I'd sacrificed to salvage failing campaigns, or the personal relationships I'd strained to keep this company afloat. Marta, my office. Now. The voice belonged to Derek Walsh, my direct supervisor and the vice president of client relations. His tone carried that familiar edge of frustration mixed with something that sounded dangerously close to desperation. I saved my work and walked across the open office space, past the empty desks that once housed a team twice our current size. The layoffs had started 6 months ago, and those of us who remained carried the workload of our departed colleagues like a badge of honor and a burden of survival. Derek's corner office overlooked Lake Michigan, where storm clouds gathered on the horizon, mirroring the atmosphere inside Pinnacle. His usually pristine desk was cluttered with financial documents, coffee-stained reports, and what looked like termination letters partially hidden under a manila folder. "Sit down, Marta." He didn't look up from the papers in front of him, his salt and pepper hair disheveled in a way that suggested he'd been running his hands through it all morning. "We need to talk about your compensation." My stomach dropped. In 3 years at Pinnacle, I'd never been called in to discuss my salary unless it was going up. Given the company's current state, I knew this conversation was heading in the opposite direction. "Derek, if this is about the Morrison account, it's not about Morrison," he cut me off, finally meeting my eyes. His usually sharp blue gaze looked tired, almost defeated. "It's about survival, Marta. This company's survival, and frankly, your job's survival." The rain began pattering against the floor-to-ceiling windows, each drop echoing the rhythm of my accelerating heartbeat. I'd seen this conversation play out with other employees over the past months. It never ended well. "The board met yesterday," Derek continued, shuffling through the papers on his desk. "We're implementing across-the-board salary reductions. Everyone's taking a hit, but some positions—" He paused, pulling out a document with my name at the top. "Some positions are being restructured more significantly." I felt the color drain from my face. "How significantly?" 25%. The words hit me like a physical blow. 25% of my salary would mean giving up my apartment in Lincoln Park, probably moving back in with my parents in the suburbs, definitely canceling the vacation I'd been planning with my sister. It would mean admitting that 3 years of 60-hour weeks and missed family dinners had been for nothing. "Derek, you can't be serious." I've been carrying half the client load since the layoffs. I brought in the Peterson Industries account just last month. Peterson Industries is a mid-tier client at best. He interrupted, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. "We need major accounts, Marta. We need clients who can write checks with multiple zeros. What we have now isn't cutting it." I stood up, my chair rolling backward with more force than I intended. "So you're punishing me for the company's inability to land bigger clients? I've exceeded every metric you set for me. My client retention rate is 93%, which is the highest in the department. Retention doesn't matter if the clients aren't worth retaining." Derek shot back, his face reddening. "We need game changers, not handholders." The unfairness of it all settled over me like a heavy blanket. I thought about the Morrison campaign I'd salvaged after Derek's initial strategy had nearly cost us the account. I remembered the countless evenings I'd spent in this very office, working alongside him to fix problems that often stemmed from his poor planning or unrealistic promises to clients. "When does this take effect?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Immediately. But there's something else." Derek's expression shifted, and for a moment, I saw something that might have been guilt flicker across his features. "The annual company gala is tomorrow night. The CEO will be there, along with the entire board and our remaining major clients. I need you there. representing your accounts professionally. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Cut my salary by a quarter, and then asked me to smile and make small talk at a company party. And if I don't want to attend, then you'll be looking for a new job on Monday. The threat was delivered with casual indifference, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. He needed me there, probably to help him save face with the clients who trusted me more than they trusted him. I walked back to my desk in a daze, the office suddenly feeling smaller, the walls pressing in from all sides. My colleagues avoided eye contact, either because they'd already heard the news or because they were afraid they'd be next. The Chicago skyline outside looked gray and unwelcoming. The city that had once represented opportunity now feeling like a trap. That evening, I sat in my Lincoln Park apartment, surrounded by the life I'd built over the past 3 years. The hardwood floors I'd saved up to refinish, the small kitchen where I'd learned to cook for one, the reading nook by the window where I'd spend Sunday mornings with coffee, and dreams of advancement. All of it now felt temporary. Borrowed time before I'd have to downsize my life to match my downsized salary. I called my sister Elena, who lived in Seattle and worked for a tech startup that seemed to exist in a different economic reality than mine. They cut your salary by how much? Her voice came through the phone with a mixture of disbelief and outrage that I wished I could feel instead of the numbness that had settled over me. 25%, Derek says it's across the board, but I have a feeling I'm getting hit harder than most. Marta, you've got to fight this. You can't just accept it. What choice do I have? It's this or unemployment, and the job market isn't exactly booming right now. Elena was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the sound of rain on her end too, as if the storm was following me across the country. What about the CEO? You've mentioned him before. Richard something. Richard Blackwood. But he's not exactly accessible to mid-level account managers. Derek's made it clear that I'm lucky to have a job at all. Maybe it's time to make yourself accessible to him. After we hung up, I sat by my window, watching the storm intensify over Lake Michigan. The gala tomorrow would be my first time in the same room as Richard Blackwood since the company holiday party last December, where he'd given a speech about resilience and innovation. While I'd stood in the back, just another face in the crowd, but Elena's words stuck with me. Maybe it was time to stop being just another face in the crowd. I pulled out my laptop and began researching everything I could find about Pinnacle's current client situation, our competitors, and the market opportunities we've been missing. If I was going to that gala, I was going armed with more than just small talk and forced smiles. The storm outside raged on, but inside my apartment, something had shifted. The numbness was giving way to determination, and for the first time since leaving Derek's office, I felt like I had some control over my situation. Tomorrow night would change everything. I just didn't know how yet. The Palmer House Hilton's grand ballroom had been transformed into what could only be described as a shrine to corporate optimism. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over round tables draped in Pinnacle's signature navy blue, while strategically placed screens displayed our company's success stories and rotating slides that felt more like wishful thinking than reality. I stood at the entrance, adjusting the black cocktail dress I bought 2 years ago for a client dinner. That had landed us a 6-figure account. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was wearing a symbol of better times to an event where I'd been effectively demoted just 24 hours earlier. The October evening had brought a crisp chill to Chicago, and guests were arriving in expensive overcoats and designer suits, their laughter and animated conversations creating a buzz of energy that felt disconnected from the financial reality I knew the company was facing. I recognized several faces from our client roster, people who trusted me with their marketing budgets and called my direct line when they had concerns. Marta, there you are. Derek appeared at my shoulder, dressed in a tuxedo that probably cost more than my monthly rent. His wife, Patricia, stood beside him in a red gown that screamed designer label, her smile as perfectly maintained as her highlights. You clean up nice, he said, his tone carrying that false camaraderie he always adopted at company events. I need you to work the room tonight. Henderson from Morrison Industries is here, and the Peterson team is at table 12. Make sure they know we appreciate their business. I nodded, biting back the response I wanted to escape. Of course, he wanted me to handle the clients, the same clients whose accounts he just devalued when justifying my salary cut. Oh, and Marta. Derek's voice dropped to a whisper. Let's keep yesterday's conversation between us tonight. No need to bring down the mood. Before I could respond, he and Patricia glided away toward a group of board members clustered near the bar. I watched them go, noting how easily Derek slipped into his role as a successful executive, all traces of yesterday's desperation hidden behind expensive fabric and practiced charm. The ballroom continued to fill with Pinnacle's remaining employees, their families, and clients. I recognized most of the faces, but the crowd felt smaller than in previous years. The layoffs had taken their toll not just on our workforce, but on the energy of events like this. Where the room once buzzed with the confidence of a growing company, now it hummed with the forced enthusiasm of people trying to convince themselves that everything was fine. I made my way toward table 12, where the Peterson Industries team was already seated. Jim Peterson, the CEO, was a man in his early 60s who'd built his manufacturing company from the ground up and had little patience for corporate theater. His daughter Sarah, who served as their marketing director, had been my primary contact for the past year. "Marta," Sarah stood up as I approached, giving me a warm hug. "I was hoping you'd be here. Dad was just telling me how impressed he's been with your work." Jim Peterson extended his hand with a firm grip that spoke to decades of honest work. "Ms. Monroe, your team's campaign increased our Q3 inquiries by 38%. That's real results. Thank you, Marta Peterson. It's been a pleasure working with your company." I sat down in the empty chair they'd saved for me, grateful for their warmth in contrast to Derek's cold professionalism. "Speaking of which," Sarah leaned in, lowering her voice, "we've been thinking about expanding our marketing budget for next year. Maybe exploring some digital initiatives you mentioned. Would you be the one handling that?" The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. Would I be handling it? 24 hours ago, I would have answered with confidence. Now, with my reduced salary and Derek's threats hanging over my head, I wasn't sure what my role would be next month, let alone next year. "I certainly hope so," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'd love to discuss those opportunities with you." As dinner was served, I found myself moving between tables, checking in with clients and colleagues, playing the part of the dedicated account manager while my mind churned with uncertainty. At the Morrison Industries table, Helen Morrison, the company's founder and CEO, pulled me aside. "Marta, I need to ask you something directly." Helen was a woman who'd never learned to sugarcoat her words, a trait that had served her well in building her logistics empire. "There are rumors that Pinnacle is having financial difficulties. Should I be concerned about the stability of our partnership?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications. Helen Morrison was one of our most important clients, and losing her account would be devastating for the company. But she was also someone who'd always been straight with me, and I owed her the same honesty. "Helen, I won't lie to you. The industry has been challenging for everyone. But what I can tell you is that my commitment to your account hasn't wavered, and the results we've delivered speak for themselves." She studied my face for a long moment, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "It's not your commitment I'm worried about, Marta. It's whether you'll still be there to honor it." Before I could respond, the lights dimmed and a spotlight illuminated the stage at the front of the ballroom. Richard Blackwood, Pinnacle CEO, stepped up to the podium, and the room fell into respectful silence. At 55, Blackwood commanded attention without demanding it. His gray hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit impeccably tailored, but it was his presence that dominated the room. I'd heard him speak at company meetings, but this was different. This was a man addressing not just his employees, but his clients, his investors, and his critics all at once. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Pinnacle Marketing Solutions' annual gala." His voice carried easily across the room without seeming to strain. "Tonight, we celebrate not just our achievements, but our resilience in the face of an industry that's changing faster than ever before." I found myself leaning forward, drawn in despite my current resentment toward the company. Blackwood had a way of speaking that made you believe he was talking directly to you, sharing confidences rather than delivering corporate speak. "I won't stand here and pretend this year has been easy," he continued, his eyes scanning the room. "We've faced challenges that have tested every aspect of our business. We've had to make difficult decisions, and we've had to ask our team to do more with less." A murmur went through the room. This was more honesty than most CEOs would offer at a company celebration. But in times of challenge, we discover what we're truly made of. We discover who steps up, who innovates, who refuses to accept defeat. His gaze swept across the audience, and for a moment, I could have sworn it lingered on me. We discover that our greatest asset isn't our technology or our processes, it's our people. The applause was polite but subdued. Everyone in the room knew that doing more with less was corporate speak for the salary cuts and layoffs that had decimated the company over the past year. Tonight, I want to take a moment to recognize some of those people who have embodied the spirit of Pinnacle. During these challenging times, my heart began to race. Recognition at a company gala usually meant a small bonus or a plaque that would sit on your desk for a few months before being relegated to a drawer. But given my current situation, even token recognition would be something. First, I'd like to acknowledge our client services team, who have maintained a client retention rate that exceeds industry standards by 15%. More applause, this time with genuine enthusiasm from the client tables. I felt a flush of pride, knowing I'd contributed significantly to that statistic. In particular, I want to recognize an account manager who has gone above and beyond in her dedication to both our clients and our company. Blackwood paused, his eyes scanning the room again. Marta Monroe, would you please join me on stage? The world seemed to tilt sideways. Around me, applause erupted, but it sounded muffled as if I were hearing it from underwater. This couldn't be happening. CEOs didn't call mid-level employees on stage at company galas, especially not employees who just had their salaries cut. Go on, Sarah Peterson whispered, nudging my shoulder. He called your name. I stood on unsteady legs, my mind racing. What was happening? Was this some kind of cruel joke? As I made my way toward the stage, I caught sight of Derek at his table near the front. His face had gone pale, his wine glass frozen halfway to his lips. The walk to the stage felt like it took forever and no time at all. The spotlight was blinding as I climbed the stairs, and suddenly I was standing next to Richard Blackwood, looking out at a room full of faces I couldn't quite make out through the glare. Ladies and gentlemen, Blackwood's voice seemed to echo from a great distance. Marta Monroe has exemplified everything we value at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions. Her innovative approach to client relations, her dedication to excellence, and her ability to deliver results in challenging circumstances have not gone unnoticed. I tried to smile, tried to look like I belonged on this stage, but my mind was reeling. Yesterday, Derek had told me I was lucky to have a job. Tonight, the CEO was praising my work in front of the entire company. Nothing made sense. Which is why, Blackwood continued, turning to face me directly. I'm pleased to announce that Marta will be joining our executive team as Director of Client Strategy, effective immediately. The applause exploded around us, but I couldn't hear it over the roaring in my ears. Director of Client Strategy. That was a position to levels above my current role, with a salary that would more than make up for yesterday's cut. But more than that, it was recognition that my work had value, that my contributions mattered. I looked out into the audience and saw Derek's table. He was still holding his wine glass, but now his knuckles were white against the stem. Patricia was whispering something urgent in his ear, her perfectly maintained smile faltering for the first time all evening. Blackwood handed me the microphone, and suddenly the room was waiting for me to speak. My mouth felt dry, my thoughts scattered, but somehow words came. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. This is unexpected. A ripple of laughter went through the room. I'm honored by this recognition, and I look forward to continuing to serve our clients and our team in this new capacity. It wasn't eloquent, but it was honest. As I handed the microphone back and shook Blackwood's hand, I felt something shift inside me. The fear and uncertainty that had consumed me for the past 24 hours was transforming into something else entirely. As I walked back to my table, the applause continued. But now I could make out individual faces in the crowd. Helen Morrison was smiling and nodding approvingly. The Peterson team was beaming, and at his table near the front, Derek Walsh was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not frustration, but something that looked remarkably like fear. The evening was far from over, and I had a feeling the real drama was just beginning. The rest of Blackwood's speech passed in a blur of corporate optimism and strategic vision, but I barely heard a word. My mind was spinning with the implications of what had just happened. Director of Client Strategy wasn't just a promotion, it was a complete transformation of my role within the company, and more importantly, it meant reporting directly to the executive team rather than through Derek. As dinner concluded and the evening transitioned into networking and dancing, I found myself surrounded by congratulations from colleagues and clients. The Peterson team insisted on buying me a drink. Helen Morrison promised to call me next week to discuss expanding our partnership, and even employees I barely knew were approaching to shake my hand. But through it all, I kept one eye on Derek's table. He'd spent the last hour in what appeared to be increasingly tense conversations with various board members, his face growing redder with each passing minute. Patricia had given up trying to maintain her social smile, and was now staring daggers across the room at anyone who dared to approach their table. Quite an evening you're having, a voice said behind me. I turned to find Richard Blackwood himself, having somehow navigated through the crowd without me noticing. Up close, he was less intimidating than he'd appeared on stage. His gray eyes warm with what seemed like genuine interest. Mr. Blackwood, thank you. I'm still processing everything. He smiled, the kind of smile that suggested he'd been in my position once upon a time. Call me. Richard, we're colleagues now, and I imagine you have questions. That was an understatement. I had about 1,000 questions, starting with how he'd even known who I was and ending with what this meant for my relationship with Derek. Perhaps we could speak privately, he suggested, nodding toward a quieter area near the ballroom's windows. As we walked away from the crowd, I caught a glimpse of Derek watching us with unconcealed anxiety. Could not let him wonder what we were discussing. Marta, Richard began once we were out of earshot of the other guests. I want you to know that tonight's announcement wasn't made lightly. I've been watching your work for some time. Watching my work? Client feedback comes directly to my office. When Helen Morrison calls to tell me that her account manager is the only reason she's still doing business with us, I pay attention. When Jim Peterson sends an email praising an employee by name, I take note. When multiple clients specifically request to work with one person, that person becomes very valuable to this company. The pieces were starting to come together. Derek never mentioned that client feedback was going to your office. Richard's expression darkened slightly. I'm not surprised. Derek has been selective in the information he shares with his team. Which brings me to something I need to address with you directly. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I received a very interesting report yesterday about departmental salary adjustments. Can you tell me about your conversation with Derek? My stomach dropped. How much did he know? How much should I tell him? He informed me that my salary was being reduced by 25% due to the company's financial situation. Richard's jaw tightened. And what reason did he give for such a significant reduction? He said my clients weren't generating enough revenue. That we needed game changers, not handholders. I repeated Derek's words exactly, watching Richard's expression grow more serious with each word. I see. And did he mention that client services is currently our most profitable department? Or that your retention rate is the highest in the company? Or that losing you would likely cost us 3 major accounts? I shook my head, feeling a mix of indignation and anger. He said I was lucky to have a job at all. Jesus. Richard ran a hand through his hair, his composure slipping for a moment. Marta, I need you to understand something. The salary reduction you were told about, it was never approved by the executive team. Derek acted without authorization. The words hit me like a physical blow. What do you mean? I mean, Derek Walsh has been making decisions about personnel and compensation that are far outside his authority. We've been conducting an internal review of departmental management practices, and your situation was one of several red flags that came to our attention. I felt dizzy. The past 24 hours of anxiety, fear, and uncertainty had been based on lies. So my salary wasn't actually being cut? Not only was it not being cut, but given your performance metrics and client feedback, you were already being considered for advancement. Tonight's announcement was moved up due to recent developments. The implications were staggering. Derek had threatened my job, cut my pay without authority, and then demanded I attend tonight's gala to help him maintain face with the clients who trusted me. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. There's more, Richard continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. We have reason to believe Derek has been misrepresenting company financials to justify personnel decisions that serve his own interests. Your situation appears to be part of a larger pattern. What kind of pattern? Reducing costs in his department to improve his performance metrics, while taking credit for the client relationships his subordinates have built. It's a short-sighted strategy that prioritizes personal advancement over company stability. As Richard spoke, I found myself thinking back over the past year. Derek's increasingly erratic behavior, his tendency to take credit for successful campaigns while blaming failures on his team, his apparent panic when clients asked to work with me directly rather than going through him. What happens now? I asked. Now, you focus on your new role. Derek's situation is being handled by the board, but I wanted you to hear directly from me that his actions don't represent this company's values or our commitment to our employees. Before I could respond, we were interrupted by a familiar voice. Richard. There you are. Derek appeared beside us, his smile strained and his eyes darting between Richard and me. I was hoping to get a moment to discuss the Morrison account transition. Actually, Derek, I think we need to have a broader conversation. Richard's tone was cordial but cold. Why don't you join me in the hotel's business center in 10 minutes? We have several matters to discuss. Derek's face went white. Of course, I'll just say goodbye to Patricia and in 10 minutes, Derek. Derek nodded and hurried away, his confidence stride replaced by something that looked more like a retreat. I'm sorry you had to witness that, Richard said, turning back to me. But I wanted you to understand that we value your contributions and we won't tolerate managers who treat their teams poorly. As Richard walked away to handle what I suspected would be a very unpleasant conversation with Derek, I stood by the windows overlooking downtown Chicago. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving the city lights reflected clearly in the wet streets below. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. The anxiety that had been my constant companion was lifting, replaced by something I hadn't felt in a long time, excitement about the future. But even as I celebrated internally, I knew this was just the beginning. Derek wouldn't go quietly, and tomorrow would bring new challenges as I stepped into a role I'd never imagined holding. Still, as I looked out at the city that had once seemed like a trap, it felt full of possibility again. The gala continued around me, but everything had changed. I was no longer Marta Monroe, the account manager fighting to keep her job. I was Marta Monroe, director of client strategy. With the backing of the CEO and the trust of our most important clients. Let Derek try to explain that to the business center. The following Monday morning, I walked into the Pinnacle offices with a confidence I hadn't felt in months. The weekend had been a whirlwind of phone calls from colleagues, congratulatory messages from clients, and most surprisingly, a call from Richard's assistant asking me to attend the executive team meeting at 9 a.m. My new office was on the 34th floor, 2 floors above my old cubicle and 3 doors down from Richard's corner suite. The space was larger than Derek's old office, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, and enough room for a proper conference table where I could meet with clients privately. As I unpacked the personal items I brought up from my old desk, I couldn't help but think about how different this Monday felt from the previous one. A week ago, I'd been dreading another day of thankless work under Derek's increasingly erratic management. Today, I was preparing to help shape the strategic direction of the entire client services department. My assistant, Jennifer, knocked on the open door frame. She was a sharp woman in her late 20s who'd been Derek's assistant until Friday, when she'd been reassigned to support my new role. "Good morning, Marta. I have a client portfolio analysis you requested, and Richard would like to see you in the executive conference room in 5 minutes. How's the transition going for you?" I asked, genuinely concerned about how the weekend's changes had affected the staff. Jennifer's professional demeanor softened slightly. "Honestly, it's a relief. Working for Derek had become challenging. He had a tendency to blame his support staff when things went wrong with clients, even when the problem stemmed from his own decisions." I nodded, not surprised but still troubled by the confirmation of Derek's poor management. "Well, I hope you'll find this role more rewarding. We'll be working closely together, and I value honest communication. Speaking of which," Jennifer lowered her voice, "you should know that Derek came in over the weekend. Security had to escort him out when he tried to access files he no longer had authorization to review." The image of Derek being escorted out by security was both satisfying and sad. Despite everything he put me through, I couldn't help but feel sorry for him. His desperation had led him to make increasingly poor decisions, and now he was facing the consequences. The executive conference room was a different world from the departmental meetings I'd attended in the past. Instead of the cramped, windowless room where Derek held his weekly team meetings, this space featured a polished mahogany table, ergonomic leather chairs, and a view of downtown Chicago that made you feel like you were on top of the world. Richard was already seated at the head of the table, along with 3 other executives I recognized but had never worked with directly: Sarah Chen, the Chief Financial Officer, Marcus Thompson, the VP of Operations, and Angela Rivera, the Head of Human Resources. "Marta, welcome to your first executive team meeting," Richard said as I took the empty chair to his right. "We have a lot to cover, but I wanted to start by addressing the elephant in the room." He nodded to Angela, who opened a folder and pulled out what looked like an official report. "Derek Walsh was terminated Friday evening following our conversation at the gala," Angela began. "The internal investigation we've been conducting revealed multiple violations of company policy, including unauthorized salary adjustments, misrepresentation of department performance metrics, and inappropriate conduct toward subordinates." Sarah Chen leaned forward, her expression serious. More troubling was her discovery that Derek had been inflating his department's profitability by taking credit for client relationships he didn't manage, and by reducing compensation for his highest-performing employees to improve his budget numbers. "Your situation was the final straw," Richard added, "when we learned he threatened your job security, while simultaneously trying to take credit for the client relationships you built. It became clear we had to act immediately." I felt a complex mix of emotions: vindication, certainly, but also sadness for how badly Derek had mismanaged his career and his team. "What's the status of his accounts?" I asked, shifting into professional mode. "That's where you come in," Marcus said, sliding a tablet across the table to me. "We're redistributing Derek's client portfolio across the team, but we need someone to oversee the transition and maintain continuity for our major accounts." I scrolled through the list, recognizing most of the companies, but noting several I'd never worked with directly. Some of these are accounts I've been wanting to approach about expanded services. Morrison Industries, for instance, has been asking about digital marketing initiatives that Derek kept deferring. "Exactly," Richard smiled. We're not just asking you to manage the transition. We're asking you to reimagine how we approach client strategy entirely. Derek's approach was defensive, focused on maintaining existing relationships without growth. We need someone who can identify opportunities and execute on them. Over the next hour, we discussed my vision for the client services department, the resources I'd need, and the timeline for implementing changes. It was exhilarating to have my ideas heard and taken seriously by people who had the authority to make them happen. As the meeting wrapped up, Richard asked me to stay behind. "How are you feeling about all this?" he asked once the others had left. "It's been a significant few days. Honestly, it feels surreal. This time last week, I was worried about making rent. Now I'm helping set company strategy." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "You know, Derek's biggest mistake wasn't his poor management or his unauthorized decisions. It was failing to recognize talent when it was right in front of him. Good leaders elevate their people because they understand that their success depends on their team's success. Is that why you promoted me so publicly at the gala?" "Partly, but also because I wanted to send a message to our clients and our employees that we recognize and reward excellence. Too many companies promote based on politics or seniority rather than performance. I wanted everyone in that room to see that merit matters here." As I walked back to my office, I passed my old cubicle, where a new hire was already setting up her workspace. The transition felt symbolic. I wasn't just moving to a new office. I was stepping into a completely different career trajectory. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Saw the LinkedIn post about your promotion. Told you it was time to make yourself accessible to the CEO. Celebration dinner when I'm in town next week." I smiled as I typed back, "Definitely. And you were right, sometimes you have to create your own opportunities." The rest of the day was filled with client calls, strategy sessions, and meetings with my new team. Helen Morrison was thrilled to hear about my promotion and immediately scheduled a meeting to discuss the expansion she'd been hoping for. Jim Peterson sent a congratulatory email along with a request to explore new marketing channels for his manufacturing company. But the most satisfying moment came around 4 p.m., when I received a call from a potential new client who'd heard about Pinnacle's new approach to client strategy and wanted to discuss bringing their business to us. Word was already spreading that things were changing at Pinnacle, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. As the sun set over Lake Michigan, casting long shadows across my new office, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. A week ago, I'd been ready to accept a massive salary cut just to keep my job. Tonight, I was planning strategy for accounts worth millions of dollars and building a team that could take Pinnacle to the next level. Derek's attempt to diminish my value had backfired spectacularly, but more than that, it had forced me to advocate for myself in ways I'd never done before. The research I'd conducted before the gala, the confidence I'd found to speak honestly with Richard, and the willingness to take risks had all contributed to this outcome. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was my mother, calling from the suburban house where I briefly imagined having to move back. "Marta, honey, your father and I saw the announcement in the Tribune business section. We're so proud of you." "Thanks, Mom. It's been quite a week. You know, when you were little, you always said you wanted to be the boss someday. Your father and I always knew you had it in you." I smiled, remembering those childhood dreams that had seemed so far away just a week ago. "I'm not the boss yet, Mom, but I'm getting there." "Well, we're having a family dinner this Sunday to celebrate. Elena's flying in from Seattle, and your Aunt Rosa is driving up from Springfield. We want to hear everything." After hanging up, I turned back to the window, where the city lights were beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness. Chicago looked different from the 34th floor, not like the intimidating maze it had seemed when I was worried about my future, but like a landscape of possibilities waiting to be explored. My computer chimed with an email from Richard. "Marta, excellent work in today's meeting. I scheduled you to present our new client strategy to the board next Friday. This is your opportunity to show them why promoting you was the right decision. I have complete confidence in your abilities." The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders, but it felt good, like a challenge I was ready to meet rather than a burden I was forced to carry. This was what I'd been working toward for 3 years, even when I didn't realize it. I spent the next hour outlining my presentation for the board, incorporating the ideas I'd been developing since Derek first told me my clients weren't valuable enough. The irony wasn't lost on me that his criticism had forced me to think more strategically about client development, ultimately preparing me for this exact role. As I finally packed up to leave, Jennifer knocked on my doorframe. "I'm heading out, but I wanted to let you know. 3 more potential clients called this afternoon asking about our services. Word is definitely getting out about the changes here, good? Make sure you schedule preliminary meetings for next week. And Jennifer, thank you for staying late to help with the transition. I know this week has been chaotic for everyone, Actually, it's been the most exciting week I've had since I started here. For the first time in months, it feels like we're moving forward instead of just trying to survive. The elevator ride down to the parking garage gave me a few minutes to process everything that had happened. A week ago, I'd stood in this same elevator, devastated by Derek's threats and uncertain about my future. Tonight, I was heading home to an apartment I could not only afford to keep, but could now afford to upgrade if I wanted to. But more than the financial security, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: genuine excitement about going to work. The dread that had characterized my Sunday evenings for months was gone, replaced by anticipation for the challenges and opportunities ahead. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Marta, this is Helen Morrison. I wanted to reach out personally to say how thrilled I am about your promotion. You've been the bright spot in our partnership with Pinnacle, and now I'm excited to see what you can do with more authority behind you. Let's talk soon about some bigger ideas I've been considering." I smiled and forwarded the message to Richard. Client confidence was the ultimate validation of the decision to promote me, and Helen Morrison's endorsement would carry significant weight with the board. As I drove through downtown Chicago toward my Lincoln Park apartment, I thought about Derek and wondered how he was processing his termination. Despite everything he put me through, I hoped he would learn from this experience and become a better leader in his next role. His downfall had been a lesson for me too, about the importance of lifting up your team instead of tearing them down, and about the dangers of letting desperation drive your decisions. The next few months would be challenging as I built out the new client strategy division and proved that Richard's faith in me was justified. There would be long days, difficult decisions, and probably more than a few mistakes along the way. But for the first time in my career, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. I pulled into my parking spot and sat for a moment, looking up at the building I thought I might have to leave just a week ago. The same windows, the same brick facade, but everything felt different now. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and the chance to prove that sometimes the best leaders emerge from the most unexpected circumstances. Derek's attempt to diminish my value had instead revealed it to the people who mattered most. As I walked up to my apartment, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. A week ago, I'd been afraid to order takeout because of budget concerns. Tonight, I was planning a celebration dinner with my family to mark the beginning of what felt like an entirely new chapter of my life. The gala had been intended as a showcase of corporate success in difficult times. In the end, it had become something more personal, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments can become the catalyst for the best opportunities if you're brave enough to seize them. I unlocked my door and stepped into my apartment, no longer seeing it as temporary shelter but as home. Tomorrow, I would begin the work of transforming Pinnacle's client strategy. Tonight, I would simply enjoy the satisfaction of knowing that hard work, integrity, and a willingness to stand up for yourself could still make all the difference. The storm had passed and the view from here was beautiful.